The Christmas lights were already up, but they blinked for no one. The first snowfall had come the night before, light and slow like a sigh, covering the hedges and front steps in a soft, apologetic powder. I had meant to clear it that morning, but I hadn't yet gotten around to it. 79 isn't old if you say it out loud with a grin, but your bones know the truth. Every joint in my fingers hummed when I tried to stir the sugar into my tea. My name is Milton James, and this was going to be my 14th Christmas morning alone. The house was quiet. Not a bad kind of quiet, just the kind that hangs around too long. Sometimes I turn the TV on just to give the silence company. This morning it was the old radio in the kitchen, the one Dorothy bought me back when they still sold cassette players with speakers. It played a scratchy version of Bing Crosby singing, "I'll Be Home for Christmas." I almost laughed at the irony. The living room still smelled like the cinnamon candles I'd lit the night before. The fake tree in the corner blinked with dutiful cheer, even though no one had sat beneath it in years. The presents underneath were all wrapped by me, labelled with tags in my handwriting. To Milton, from Milton, written with a blue pen that kept drying out. I bought myself socks, a new pair of slippers, and a biography on Harold Wilson I'd already read at the library last spring. I glanced at the clock, 9:14. If they were going to call, they would have by now. My daughter Claire always said she was terrible with time zones, even though she lived in the same one. Michael, my eldest, hadn't called since Easter. He and his wife always sent a card, one of those photo ones with the grandkids standing in front of a beach or a ski lodge. It came last week. I didn't recognize the oldest boy. He'd grown a moustache. Looked like he was trying to be a man, and here I was trying to remember what he sounded like. I had planned to cook myself something festive, but I wasn't really hungry. Tea and toast would do. I stared at the toast as it cooled on the plate. Margarine sat untouched in its tub. Even the jam seemed too much of a fuss. Then came the sound, a dull crunch of snow under boots. I paused, waited. There it was again, not imagined. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, making their way up the front path. I moved toward the window, careful with my knee. A figure in a red coat. Not family, too young to be a neighbor. I opened the door before they knocked. "Good morning," she said, breath fogging in the cold. "I didn't mean to intrude, sir. I deliver for the market on Tuesdays and noticed your bin was still out front. Figured maybe you weren't feeling well." She had a parcel in her hand, brown paper, string-tied properly. "You live nearby?" I asked. She nodded, wiping her nose with the back of a mitten. "Check across the street. Top flat above the florist. Moved in last month. Name's Danny." "Milton," I said. "Thank you for the check-in." She handed me the parcel. "I baked too many mince pies. Thought you might want some." I almost didn't take them, not because of pride, just habit. But her eyes were kind, sincere in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. "Would you like some tea?" I asked before I could talk myself out of it. She smiled. "I'd love some." We sat in the kitchen, the only warm room in the house thanks to the old radiator beneath the window. She told me she'd grown up in Leeds, worked in tech support, and hated Brussels sprouts. I told her about Dorothy, how we used to spend Christmas playing cards by the fire, drinking too much sherry and pretending it was only for the holiday. She laughed in the right places, asked questions, real ones, not the kind you ask just to be polite. I offered her some of my toast, and she accepted it like it was a gourmet meal. When she left, 2 hours later, the house didn't feel quite so heavy. The radio had gone quiet. I hadn't noticed. I stood by the window and watched her walk away, her boots crunching again in the snow. She paused at the end of the drive and waved without turning around. I raised my hand. Something in my chest loosened, like a knot that had been pulled too tight for too long. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything changed. The next morning, the house felt even quieter. Funny how one kind conversation can stir up all the silence that follows. Danny's visit had warmed the kitchen more than the radiator ever could, but now the corners of the house felt colder again. Maybe because I'd tasted what it was like to be seen, and now I missed it more than ever. The tea kettle whistled, sharp and shrill like it always was, and I shuffled across the linoleum floor to take it off the burner. The cupboard creaked when I opened it, like it was complaining about being awake. Everything in this house creaks now, Stairs, doors, my knees. Everything's got something to say, but no one's here to listen. I poured the hot water into the same chipped mug I'd used yesterday and the day before that. The one Dorothy painted with snowflakes at that winter fair in 1989. She wasn't much of an artist, but she said it looked seasonal enough. I've never had the heart to throw it out, even though the handle's cracked and it burns my fingers if I hold it wrong. I took my tea to the armchair by the window, the one with the sag in the cushion where Dorothy used to sit. I still keep a blanket draped over it, like she's just stepped into the other room for a second. Ridiculous, I know, but grief makes you keep certain illusions alive, even when logic's had enough. The frost on the window looked like veins this morning, spidering across the glass in delicate white webs. Outside, the bay sat still and grey, the same colour as the sky. A seagull drifted by, wings wide, not in any hurry. Nothing ever is out here. I picked up the phone just after 10. No messages, no missed calls, nothing but that empty dial tone. I pressed the redial button, even though I knew it wouldn't help. Claire hadn't called in months. Michael sent his usual Christmas card with a signature that looked more like a corporate memo than a note from a son. Best wishes, Michael, Stacy, Devon and Carly. Not even a love you tacked on. Not even a scribble from the kids. When they were small, they used to come here every Christmas. The house would fill up with noise and arguments and badly wrapped gifts. Someone always knocked over the tree. Someone else always burned the carrots. It used to annoy the hell out of me. Now I'd give anything to hear that chaos again. Instead, there's only the grandfather clock ticking in the hall and the soft hum of the fridge trying to do its job. I went for a walk just to move my legs and clear my thoughts. I took the long loop that goes around the bay and up toward the old lighthouse. The wind cut sharp against my cheeks, the kind of cold that makes your eyes water, so you can lie to yourself and say it's just the weather. As I passed the church on Westmere Road, I heard singing inside. A children's choir, probably rehearsing for the holiday service. I stood outside for a bit, listening through the heavy wooden doors. Silent night. Not a favourite of mine, but something about their small voices trying to hit those long notes made my chest ache in a way I didn't expect. I kept walking. When I got back to the house, I noticed the pie tin Danny had left was still sitting in the kitchen. 3 mince pies left. I opened the tin and picked one up. Cold, but not bad. Flaky sweet. They reminded me of the kind Dorothy used to make, only hers were always a little too burnt on the bottom. We'd pretend not to notice. We were good at pretending. I cleaned up a little after that. Swept the kitchen, wiped down the counters, dusted the old record player. I found a forgotten ornament stuck in the back of the hallway drawer, a tiny wooden reindeer with a missing leg. I laughed when I saw it. Dorothy had bought it at a yard sale and insisted it gave the tree character. I hung it up anyway, lopsided and all. The tree needed company too. By 5 o'clock, it was already dark. The sun doesn't linger long this time of year. I made myself a sandwich for dinner and sat at the table with the radio on low. Some program about ancient Christmas traditions in Scandinavia. I wasn't listening. The loneliness crept in around the edges like a draft. Not sudden, not dramatic, just quiet, familiar, insistent. Like a cat that slinks in through the back door and curls up beside your ribs. You don't fight it, you just shift a little, make room for it, try not to let it settle too deep. I went up to bed early but couldn't sleep. The bed was too wide, too cold on one side. I lay there staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster with my eyes, thinking about how strange it is that you can live a whole life surrounded by people and still end up alone in the end. Not in a tragic way. Just in a quiet, overlooked way, like a forgotten ornament in the back of a drawer. I thought about Danny, how she smiled without forcing it, how she listened like it mattered. Maybe tomorrow I'd bring her something, a thank you of some kind. God knows I have enough books and knickknacks around this place to gift a small village, and maybe she'd come by again, maybe not. Either way, I'd remember that morning. The Christmas lights were still blinking on the tree when I came downstairs for a glass of water. I stood in the doorway and watched them twinkle against the tinsel, soft and stubborn in their cheer. Alone or not, they kept shining. I decided I would too, for a little longer. It happened 3 days after Christmas, just as the snow began to melt into grey slush at the edges of the drive. I was upstairs sorting through a drawer of scarves, most of them Dorothy's, all of them still holding her faint scent of lilac and spearmint tea, when I heard it, a knock at the door. Not a pounding, not insistent, just a polite, steady rhythm. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 again. I stood still for a moment, the soft wool of a green scarf in my hands. Who knocks anymore? Everyone rings the bell. Everyone texts first. No one shows up unannounced, except maybe a ghost or someone who doesn't know better. I tucked the scarf back into the drawer and made my way down the stairs slowly, knees aching like they'd been soaking in vinegar. The knock came again, just as I reached the last step. When I opened the door, the winter air rushed in first, sharp and metallic, with the smell of melting ice and wood smoke. Then came the sight of him, a young man, maybe late 20s, wearing a worn corduroy coat and a red wool hat pulled low. His cheeks were wind-bitten, and his hands were stuffed deep into his coat pockets. "Sorry to bother you," he said quickly, his voice light but shaking from the cold. "I don't mean to intrude. I was just wondering if you needed help with anything, shoveling, moving bins, anything like that. I live 2 blocks over, lost my job last month, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to ask." His eyes didn't dart around like a thief's. They held steady, brown and tired and honest. I recognized that look. It was the same one I used to see in the mirror when Dorothy first got sick, a man trying not to drown. "What's your name?" I asked, stepping slightly into the cold. "Jordan," he said. "Jordan Reeves." "Milton," I replied, reaching out a hand. He hesitated, probably not expecting the gesture, but shook it anyway. "I don't have much that needs shoveling," I said, "but I wouldn't mind company for tea if you're not in a rush." His brows lifted. "Are you sure? You knocked, didn't you?" I said. "Come in before your nose falls off." He laughed, an actual laugh, not a polite one, and stepped inside, stomping snow off his boots. I closed the door behind him, and the house swallowed the cold once more. I led him into the kitchen, the only place in the house that ever really felt alive. The kettle was still warm from earlier, and the radio hummed some quiet jazz station in the background. Jordan sat at the table, rubbing his hands together as I prepared the tea. "Milk? Sugar?" I asked. "Just black, thanks." I passed him the mug and sat across from him. For a few moments we just sipped. The warmth crept back into his face. He had a small scar on his chin, like the kind you get falling off a bike as a kid. "So," I said, "what did you used to do before all this?" "Warehouse work, forklifts, shipping stuff, decent pay, long hours, place shut down right before December. No warning, just a locked gate and a final paycheck." "That's hard," he shrugged. "Worse for others. I don't have kids. Don't have much, really. But I like staying busy. Holidays make it worse, you know. Everything slows down. Everyone's inside with their families. You walk through town and see all the lights and the warmth, and it just reminds you that you're not part of it." I nodded, feeling something twist behind my ribs. "I do know." He looked up, almost surprised. "You live here alone?" "Yes, for the last 8 years. My wife passed in 15, kids are grown, moved away, they call now and then, send cards. But they didn't come this year." "No," I said simply. "I'm sorry." I waved it off. "Don't be. I've made my peace with it. Doesn't mean it doesn't sting, though." He nodded again, both hands cradled around the mug like it was the last warm thing in the world. "You'd think being around people would help, but sometimes it just makes you lonelier." I understood that too well. We talked for another hour, about little things, music, old movies. He liked Hitchcock. I told him about Dorothy's obsession with Rear Window. He smiled when I described how she used to narrate the film like it was a stage play, adding voices to every character. "You sound like you miss her a lot." "I do, every day." He looked around the kitchen then, at the faded wallpaper with its pattern of blue teacups, the crooked painting above the sink, the tiny calendar with a hand-drawn robin pinned to the corkboard. "This place feels like it remembers things," he said. I felt my throat catch. "It does." When he finally stood to leave, I handed him a tin, the last 2 mince pies Danny had left me. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hand hovering above the lid. "I've had my share," I smiled, "and you've earned them." He held the tin like a sacred thing. "Thank you. Come by again," I said, "even if it's just for tea. You don't need to ask first." "I will," he said, grinning now. I really will." And then he was gone. The door closed, the silence returned, but it was different now, not empty, just waiting. I stood at the window for a long time, watching his figure shrink down the street south, his red hat bobbing with each step. Something about him lingered even after he disappeared, like the smell of firewood after the flames gone out. I turned off the radio, let the stillness settle. Maybe that knock wasn't just about help. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the beginning. He returned the next day, just before noon, holding a thermos and a nervous smile. The snow had stopped, but the wind had picked up, turning the world outside into a blur of dry branches tapping against windows and stray leaves skittering across the porch. I'd been in the living room, trying and failing to read a book, when I heard the front steps creak. This time there was no knock, just a gentle tap of fingernails on glass. I opened the door and found Jordan there, cheeks pink and eyes a little unsure. "Thought I'd bring the tea this time," he said, lifting the thermos like a peace offering. "Figured you might like a change." I stepped aside and let him in. "You've got good timing. The kettle was taking too long anyway." He followed me to the kitchen like he'd done it a dozen times before, not just once. He didn't ask to take off his boots, but did it anyway. Didn't ask where the mugs were either. He waited until I gestured to the cupboard, then moved with quiet ease. That kind of awareness always struck me. Not the loud, pushy kind. The good kind. The kind Dorothy used to call gentle man energy. "What kind of tea is this?" I asked as he poured it out. "Spiced chai. Got it from a little shop down by the canal. Smells a bit like Christmas." And it did. Cinnamon and clove. Something warm and sharp that curled up into your nose like a memory. We sat in the kitchen again. Same seats as before. Only this time, Jordan wasn't holding his mug like he was afraid it might vanish. He was more relaxed, more present, and so was I. "You do this often?" I asked. "Show up at old men's houses with tea?" He smiled, then sipped. "No, usually I keep to myself, but yesterday felt different. You didn't treat me like a problem to be solved." "You didn't act like one," I said plainly. He nodded. "People have a way of shrinking you down to your lowest moment. Jobless? Then you're lazy. Lonely? Must be your fault, sir. Poor? Well, that's on you. But you didn't do that. Maybe because I know how it feels to be on the other side of those labels." He looked down into his mug. "Funny, I thought Christmas would hurt less this year." "Does it ever?" I said, then regretted it. But Jordan didn't flinch. "No, but you get better at hiding it, I guess." He told me more about his life then, slowly but clearly, about growing up in foster homes, moving every couple of years, never really putting down roots. About trying college, dropping out, picking up odd jobs, warehouse, courier, night stalker. He didn't say any of it with bitterness, just fact. Like reading a timeline out loud to someone who wasn't going to judge. "You must think I'm some sad case," he added with a chuckle. "I think you're someone who made it through a lot of things," I said. "There's nothing sad about still being here." He looked up at me like he didn't quite believe I meant it, but he wanted to. When he left later that day, he insisted on clearing my front path. "You're not slipping and breaking a hip on my watch," he said, already grabbing the old aluminum shovel that leaned against the porch. I let him, though I tried not to watch. Something about seeing someone take care of you after years of being invisible. It's hard to accept gracefully. As I watched from the window, I remembered how Claire used to shovel the drive as a teen, muttering and dragging her boots, acting like the snow had personally betrayed her. She always hated the cold. I smiled at the memory, then blinked it away. After Jordan finished, he waved goodbye from the bottom of the steps and said, "See you tomorrow?" I nodded. "Same time. Bring the chai." That became our rhythm. Each day he came back. Sometimes with food, cheap pastries from a bakery, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, once even a bag of oranges. We'd talk, drink tea, swap stories. Sometimes about Dorothy, sometimes about his wandering childhood, sometimes about the odd characters we'd both met in our respective decades. I started cooking again. Simple things, but enough to fill the house with smells. Roasted potatoes, garlic soup, apple crumble. Nothing fancy, but it gave me purpose. And he always cleaned the dishes without asking. One evening, just after New Year's, we sat in the living room listening to a record, Nat King Cole, soft and scratchy. Jordan was flipping through a photo album I'd left on the coffee table. He stopped at one with Dorothy in the garden, holding up a tomato like she'd discovered gold. "She looks fierce," he said with a grin. "She was," I replied. "She could spot a liar in 2 seconds flat and bake the best rhubarb pie in the county. Never met a crossword puzzle she couldn't destroy. Loved birds, hated dogs." He laughed. "She sounds like someone you don't forget." "You don't," I said. "Not ever. You just learn how to talk to them in quieter ways." We sat in silence for a while after that, but it wasn't heavy. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people trust the quiet not to turn on them. "You ever think about moving?" Jordan asked suddenly. "This house must feel huge." "Every day," I said. "But I don't think I could bear packing her things. It'd feel like putting her away." He nodded. "You don't have to go anywhere. Just curious." He didn't press, didn't offer some shallow, "you should get out more." He just sat with me, as if that was enough, and it was. When he left that night, he paused at the door and said, "Thank you, Milton. You make this place feel like Christmas again." I watched him walk into the darkness, the porch light casting a long shadow behind him. I turned off the record player, turned off the lights, and sat there in the dim room, thinking about how a simple knock, a thermos of tea, and a decent pair of ears had done more for me than years of holiday cards and scheduled phone calls. A stranger had shown me more kindness than my own blood, and for the first time in years I didn't feel alone. Not exactly. Not anymore. January settled in like an old coat, familiar, frayed at the cuffs, and colder than I remembered the days that followed. Jordan's visit blurred into one another, not in a dull way, but in a gentle rhythm. We didn't make plans, but he always came. Sometimes morning, sometimes closer to dusk. He didn't knock anymore. Just tapped the glass or called out through the mail slot, "You decent, Milton?" and then let himself in when I called back. I found myself keeping the kettle half full and the kitchen tidied in case he showed. Not for vanity, just readiness. I hadn't had a reason to prepare for anyone in years. It felt good, simple, necessary. We talked about everything and nothing, politics, birds, bad movies. One afternoon, I read aloud a short story I'd written in the 70s and forgotten in a shoebox. Jordan listened like it was a masterpiece. He didn't say it was good, he said it felt real. That meant more. He told me about the dreams he used to have as a kid, building cabins in the woods, running a coffee shop, writing a book about the foster system. Never happened, he said. Life got in the way. Bills, bad luck, wrong choices. He didn't sound bitter, just resigned. I told him how I used to dream of opening a bookshop with Dorothy. She would have run the counter, bossed the customers around, I said. I'd have shelved the books and talked them into buying the long ones. "You still could," Jordan said. I laughed. "I'd need stronger knees and a business partner who knows what a TikTok is." "Lucky for you," he grinned. "I'm unemployed and have no idea what I'm doing with my life." That's how it started, half a joke, half a spark. We spent the next few afternoons in the attic, digging through old boxes. Dorothy had saved everything, receipts from vacations, ticket stubs, a menu from the cafe we'd eaten at the day we got engaged. I found a crate labelled, "Used Books for Someday." Inside were titles with scribbled notes in the margins, her handwriting looping and delicate. "Too slow, skip chapter 3, reminds me of Milton, lovely ending, read again." "This woman," Jordan said, holding up a battered copy of Mrs. Dalloway, "she really was a force." "She still is," I said, "in here anyway. Each day with him felt like a strange gift. Not flashy, not grand, just solid, dependable, and increasingly rare. On the 4th day, we made soup together. It was his idea. I had vegetables going soft in the fridge, and he claimed he knew just enough to get us both sick or satisfied. The kitchen turned into a comedy of errors. I dropped the onion twice. He confused coriander with cumin. The pot boiled over once, then again. But in the end, it tasted decent. Peppery, with a kind of rustic charm. "Best meal I've had since November," he said between mouthfuls. "Though that may be because it's the only meal I've had with company." "Well," I said, "that gives us both shamefully low bars to clear." He laughed, loud and full-chested. It echoed up into the rafters and made the dust on the light fixture dance. After we ate, he asked if I'd ever considered getting a dog. "They're good company," he said, "and loyal." "I'm old, Jordan," I replied. "I'll die before the damn thing's house-trained." He paused, then smiled. "Fair point, but still, Someone should benefit from your cooking. I hadn't cooked like that in years, not with someone beside me, not with someone laughing when I dropped a spoon instead of sighing. On the 6th day, we sat in the den with a jigsaw puzzle Dorothy had never opened. 1,000 pieces, all shades of brown and green, an impossible woodland scene. Jordan said we needed a meditative challenge. By piece 40, we'd given up any hope of finishing it before spring. But we kept at it, piece by piece, in between conversations. We didn't talk about big things every day, not all at once. Sometimes we just sat, shared space. I'd forgotten how comforting that could be, just sitting near another breathing person without needing to perform. On the 7th day, a small envelope arrived in the post, no return address. Inside was a holiday card from Michael, late as always. A stock image of pine cones and a printed message, "Hope the season treated you well. Thinking of you." No personal note, no signature, not even the kid's name scribbled in. I showed it to Jordan without saying anything. He read it, handed it back. "If you'd sent this to me," he said, "I'd have assumed it was junk mail." "It's the thought that counts," I said. "What thought?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. That night, Jordan brought over an old laptop of his. "Thought you might want to try email again," he said. "You could start a blog, tell your stories. Write about Dorothy." "A blog?" I raised an eyebrow. "What am I, an influencer?" "Exactly," he grinned. "You'll be the first 80-year-old to go viral for homemade soup and existential dread." We set it up together at the kitchen table. Slow, clumsy progress, but progress nonetheless. He showed me how to post, how to add photos. We called it Words from a Quiet House. I typed the first entry that night, about snow, silence, and the knock that broke it. I didn't know if anyone would read it. Didn't care, really. But writing it down, putting it out there, it made something in me feel lighter. As the days passed, the house began to feel different. Not fuller, not louder, but less hollow. The corners didn't echo as much. The quiet wasn't as sharp. The air warmed, not just from the radiator, but from presence. One morning, Jordan didn't show. No text, no knock, nothing. I sat by the window longer than usual, watching the road. Every sound outside made my heart stutter, but at 4 p.m. the mail slot clattered and in came a note, hastily written. "Sorry, job interview came up last minute. Fingers crossed. Back tomorrow. Save me some tea." I stared at the note for a long time, holding it like proof. Proof that someone remembered. Someone cared enough to explain their absence. I poured 2 cups of tea anyway, left one on the table across from me, and when I drank mine, I smiled. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just waiting. I was expecting someone. It was the 2nd Monday of January when the phone rang. Sharp and sudden, like a knock on a casket lid. I was in the living room, rearranging the stack of books Jordan and I had left by the fireplace. His latest suggestion, a dog-eared copy of A Man Called Ove, sat on top. The ringtone cut through the quiet, a shrill, old-fashioned bell I'd never bothered to change. For a moment, I just stood there, watching the receiver like it might answer itself. Then I picked it up. "Hello? Dad? Hey, it's Claire." Her voice was bright, cheery, in the way that always sounded a little too forced. The way people sound when they know they've been gone too long. "Well," I said, lowering myself slowly into the armchair, "this is a surprise." "Yeah, I know. I've been meaning to call. It's just, things have been nuts. The kids had school stuff. Alan's got a new project at work. I caught that awful cold everyone's got. But I'm calling now, right?" "You are," I said, keeping my voice even. "It's good to hear from you. So how was Christmas? Did you end up going to Michael's?" I let out a small laugh, one that tasted a little bitter. "No, Claire. Michael never invited me." There was a pause, just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Oh, really? He said you were thinking about it." "No, he said he'd see how things were going and then never followed up. I spent the holiday here." Another pause. "Oh, Dad, why didn't you say something? What would have been the point?" She sighed, and I could picture her pinching the bridge of her nose, the way she used to when the twins tracked mud through the kitchen. "I wish you'd just told me. We could have, we had an extra seat at the table." "Did you think to offer it?" Another pause. This one longer, heavier. "Look," she said, trying to pivot, "I'm calling now because we wanted to check in. The kids wanted to say hi. Do you want to talk to them?" "Sure." I waited. I could hear muffled voices in the background. Then the sound of one of them complaining. "They're a little distracted with their video games," Claire said after a beat. "You know how kids are." "I do. I remember when they used to draw me Christmas cards. Now I'm lucky to get a group text." "That's not fair," she said quietly. "Maybe not, but it feels true." The silence stretched again, and then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. "How have you been? Are you getting by okay?" "I'm fine. I've had company." "Company?" "A young man named Jordan. He lives a few streets over. He's been helping out. Good conversation. Good tea." "Wait, you let a stranger into your house?" I could hear the panic crawling into her voice. "He's not a stranger anymore. He's a friend." "Dad," she said, voice tight, "you can't just trust random people. What if he's trying to take advantage of you? You live alone. You're vulnerable." "I'm not vulnerable, Claire. I'm just alone. There's a difference." "Have you told Michael?" "Told him what? That someone actually bothered to treat me like a person?" Her silence said enough. "I'm sorry," she muttered. "I didn't know you were feeling this way." "Of course you didn't. You haven't asked." "Well, maybe if you'd reached out. It's not always the lonely one's job to beg for company, Claire." The line went quiet again. I could feel her shifting uncomfortably on the other end, probably scanning her calendar for the next excuse. "Look," she said eventually, "we want to come visit soon. Maybe next month. Bring the kids, stay a weekend." "We'll see," I replied. "It's a busy time." "For you?" She chuckled. "Doing what?" "Living," I said. "That's more than you've been watching." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You're really upset, aren't you?" "I've been lonely, Claire. Not because you're far away, but because you've made no effort to be close. Distance is miles. Absence is a choice." I could hear the sting land. I didn't mean it to hurt, but sometimes the truth sounds sharp no matter how gently you try to hand it over. "I'll talk to Michael," she said. "We'll try to do better." "I hope you do," I said, "for your sake." We ended the call shortly after, polite, distant, like strangers playing dress-up as family. I sat for a long time afterward, the phone resting on my lap, the room colder than it had been all morning. Later that afternoon, Jordan showed up. No knock, just a call from the hallway. "Hey, old man," brought banana bread. I didn't move at first, didn't say anything, just let the warmth of his voice carry through the rooms like sunlight. "You okay?" he asked, stepping into the living room and setting the loaf down on the coffee table. "You look like someone just told you your dog ran away." "Family called," I said, after a month of silence. He sat down across from me, picking at the crust of the bread. "Was it good?" "Depends on what you mean by good," he nodded. "You don't have to talk about it." "I want to," I said, "just not yet." And we sat there eating warm banana bread in a room still buzzing from a phone call that arrived too late, with love that had been absent too long. I glanced over at him, his face calm, his presence grounding. "Jordan, yeah? Thank you for being here, for showing up. That's something I thought I'd forgotten how to expect." He smiled, then held up his mug. "To showing up." I clinked mine against his. "To showing up, to being seen, to the family you find when the one you were born into forgets how to find you." I couldn't sleep that night, not because of nightmares or aches, though at 79 both liked to take turns, but because of what Claire had said, or maybe what she hadn't said. The kind of silence that lingers louder than words. After she called, I kept replaying the conversation in my head. Her voice, pleasant, polished, like someone phoning in from a distance, both literal and emotional. Not unkind, just unfamiliar. I knew her as a baby, a girl with skinned knees and chocolate-smeared cheeks. But the woman on the phone? She was someone else entirely. Someone I had to tiptoe around. Someone who measured concern in calendar squares. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the old radiator clunk and rattle. Dorothy used to call it the house's heartbeat. She'd smile whenever it started up, said it made the place feel alive. Now it just reminded me how much effort it took to keep everything warm. By morning, something inside me felt colder than the floorboards. I made tea, the usual way, poured it into the chipped snowflake mug, but this time I didn't sit down. Instead, I walked to the study, opened the bottom drawer of the old filing cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled Final Affairs. Dorothy's handwriting, neat, looping letters. We'd drawn up the will together over a decade ago, before the diagnosis, before she began forgetting the names of herbs in the garden and the names of the children we raised. The original plan had been simple. The estate, this house, modest savings, a few investments, would be divided evenly between Claire and Michael. We believed in fairness, in giving equally, without favoritism. We assumed they'd care for the memories as much as the money. But standing in that room, tea cooling in my hand, I realized we had been wrong. Not out of malice, but out of hope. We assumed that children raised in love would always return to it. We assumed they would want to hold on to the house that held their childhood. But they didn't. Not really. To them, this place was real estate, not history. They'd proven it slowly. Little signs, missed birthdays, rushed visits, questions about market value couched in careful language. Always polite, always distant. And meanwhile, someone like Jordan, someone who owed me nothing, showed up day after day with banana bread and conversation. He knew the names of Dorothy's favorite birds. He remembered how many lumps of sugar I took. He didn't ask for anything, not even recognition, just presence. Something my own blood seemed to find too costly. I set the folder down on the desk, the old brass lamp casting a small circle of light across the paperwork. I could almost hear Dorothy's voice behind me, soft but firm. We raised them well, Milton. But people change, and love doesn't keep score, it just notices who shows up. I left the study without touching anything. Not yet, not today. That afternoon, Jordan came by as usual, this time with a box of old vinyl records he'd found in a charity shop. "Figured you'd appreciate the classics," he said, placing it by the turntable. "Lots of Sinatra, some Ella Fitzgerald, and, look at this, Bing Crosby's White Christmas, still in the sleeve." I grinned, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. He noticed. Of course he did. "Something on your mind?" I nodded. "Just dusting off some thoughts I should have looked at years ago." He waited. Didn't press. Just sat on the floor, legs crossed, flipping through the albums like they were sacred texts. "You ever think about legacy?" I asked. He looked up. "Sometimes. Usually when I'm lying awake, wondering what I've done that mattered." "Same," I said. "And lately, I keep circling the same question. Which is, what do we owe the people who stop showing up?" He didn't answer right away. He slid one record out of its sleeve, held it up to the light. Then he said, "Probably less than we owe the ones who never leave." I nodded slowly. That's what I thought. He stayed for dinner. We made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup from a can. Simple, but comforting. He told me about a job he was interviewing for, a janitorial position at the local school. Not glamorous, he said, but honest work, and the kids leave snacks lying around. After he left, I stood at the doorway and watched the snow return. Just flurries this time. Gentle, hesitant, like the sky couldn't decide whether to commit. The next morning, I returned to the study, opened the drawer again. This time, I took out the folder and placed it on the desk. Then I called my solicitor. "Mr. Lamb," he said cheerfully, "to what do I owe the pleasure? I need to make some changes to my will." There was a pause on the line. "Of course. May I ask?" "I've decided," I interrupted, "that legacy should go where it's wanted, not where it's assumed." I could hear his pen scratching across paper. "Very well, Mr. Lamb. We'll schedule a meeting. Shall we say Thursday at noon?" Perfect. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. A kind of clarity that doesn't arrive loudly, but settles in your bones like warmth from a fire. Later that evening, Claire called again. Second time in a week. A new record. "Just wanted to check in," she said. "See how you're doing." "I'm doing just fine," I replied. "Michael and I were talking," she continued, voice cautious. "We wanted to know if you'd considered downsizing. The house must be a lot to handle on your own." "You mean sell it?" "Well, if that's what you want. Of course, we'd help. We could find a place near us, closer to the kids. It might be nice." "Claire," I said slowly, "do you want me closer, or just less inconvenient?" She was silent. "I'm staying," I said, "and the house is staying too, with someone who actually shows up to sit in it." She didn't respond. Not right away. "I don't understand," she finally said. "You don't have to," I replied. "Just know that love, when it's real, makes itself known, and so does absence." We ended the call quietly, and when I walked back into the living room where Jordan had left his scarf on the back of the chair, I smiled. Because I had made peace with the truth. Family is not a matter of names in a will. It's who brings you tea without being asked, who remembers your stories, who makes the silence bearable. And that's who legacy belongs to. The morning I signed the new will was bright and painfully blue, the kind of cold that made your lungs sting when you breathed too deep. I stood at the front window watching frost crack and curl along the edges of the pane like a spider's map, feeling the weight of the pen in my hand long before I even picked it up. Jordan was due by around 10, but I hadn't told him what I was doing that day. Not yet. I wasn't hiding it. I just wanted the paperwork done before anyone could talk me out of it, including myself. At 11 minutes past 9, the solicitor arrived. Mr. Arthur Bell, same fellow who handled Dorothy's estate. Tall man with a white moustache and a briefcase that looked older than both of us. Cold one today, he said, stamping snow off his polished shoes. Come in, Arthur, I said. Let's not pretend we've got all the time in the world. He chuckled as he stepped into the living room, glancing around like he always did, as if expecting to see Dorothy pop her head out of the kitchen and ask if he wanted a biscuit. You've kept the place just as she had it, he said softly, setting down the briefcase on the coffee table. She knew what she was doing, I replied. I've had no desire to change it. We sat. He opened his case. Papers shuffled like dry leaves. The official documents had already been drawn up based on the phone call. All I had to do now was sign. We'll need 2 witnesses, of course, he said. I've brought a paralegal and my driver, both outside. They'll be in and out. No fuss. I nodded. Fine. He handed me the pen. Smooth black lacquer, cool to the touch. I looked down at the papers. The old version of the will had been concise, split down the middle between Claire and Michael. An even 50-50 like a polite divorce. Names neatly typed. Now their names were scratched out, replaced with someone else's. Someone unexpected. Someone who didn't share my blood but had shared my bread, my stories and my silence. I signed slowly, deliberately. 1 page, then the next. By the time I reached the last signature line, my hand had started to ache, but the ache felt like closure. Arthur slid the documents away, satisfied. That's that, he said. I'll file them this afternoon. All legal, all binding. I stood, stretching the stiffness from my knees. Thank you, Arthur. He looked at me for a moment. You sure about this? More than I've ever been. He nodded, and there was no judgment in his eyes, just understanding. The kind you earn after burying your fair share of people and promises. Once they'd gone, I was left alone again in the quiet, the kind that used to make the house feel like a museum. But today it didn't feel like absence. It felt like breath held in anticipation. Jordan arrived just before 10:30, as expected. Morning, he called out from the hallway, shaking off snow like a soaked retriever. Your path's a sheet of ice. Thought I was going to reenact the Titanic. I chuckled from the kitchen. It's the house's way of keeping you humble. He came in, cheeks red from the cold, carrying a bag with 2 cinnamon buns and a folded newspaper. They had extra at the cafe. Figured you'd earn something sweet. I poured us each a cup of tea, then motioned for him to sit at the table, his usual spot, under the old framed photograph of Dorothy in the garden with her tomato. What's the occasion? He asked, biting into his bun. I made a decision this morning, I said, sipping from my mug. Final, legal, signed and witnessed. He raised an eyebrow. You selling the house? No, I said. I'm giving it to you, eventually. He froze, bun halfway to his mouth. What? I changed my will, I said plainly. Everything, this house, my savings, whatever's left when I go, it's yours now. He stared at me, stunned silent. It took him nearly 10 full seconds to speak. Milton, no, I can't accept that. You can't, your family. They've had years, I said, not unkindly. Years to show up, years to care. And you walked into this house with nothing but kindness and a thermos of tea, and you never left. But you're the only one who sat at this table and asked how I'm really doing. The only one who listens without waiting to talk. The only one who saw me as a person and not a duty. He shook his head, blinking fast. You can't just hand me your life. I'm not handing you my life, I said. I'm handing you what's left of mine. The physical part, the part I can't take with me. He looked down at his hands. Rough hands, scarred hands, honest hands. But what about your kids? They'll be upset, maybe furious, but it'll pass. People get over money faster than they get over guilt. He didn't respond for a while. We just sat there, the radio humming faint jazz in the background, the house holding its breath. Finally, he said, I don't know how to thank you. You already have, I replied. Every day you came back, every time you listened, every cup of tea, every shared silence, you gave me back something I didn't realize I'd lost. He swallowed hard. What's that? Being needed, being seen. He looked up, and his eyes were wet. I didn't do any of it to get anything, he said quietly. I know. I replied, that's exactly why you deserve it. He left later that day, quieter than usual, not distant, just full. Like someone carrying something delicate and heavy inside. After the door shut behind him, I sat in the kitchen, the signed papers locked away upstairs, and listened to the house breathe. It didn't feel empty. It felt ready. Ready to pass on. Not just walls and windows, but warmth, memory, legacy. Because sometimes family doesn't come from bloodlines. Sometimes family knocks on your door in the cold and stays through the thaw. It was Claire who found out first a week after I signed the new will. She showed up at the house unannounced, something she hadn't done in nearly a decade. Her arrival was as jarring as a brick through a window. The knock was sharp, impatient, not like Jordan's gentle tap or his occasional mail slot whisper. I opened the door and there she stood. Long coat, manicured hands clenched around a handbag, expression drawn tight with something between concern and suspicion. "Hi, Dad," she said, not waiting for an invitation before stepping inside. "We need to talk." I stepped aside and closed the door, watching as she walked into the living room like it still belonged to her childhood. Her eyes scanned the space, the blanket folded across the armchair, the half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, Jordan's scarf draped over the back of the couch. She noticed it. "Who's staying here?" she asked. "No one's staying," I replied, calm but firm. "Jordan visits. We share tea, stories, the occasional grilled cheese." Her mouth tightened. "Is this about the solicitor?" she asked. So she knew. I nodded and walked to the sideboard, lifting the kettle and moving toward the stove. "Would you like some tea?" "No," she said, voice clipped. "I just came from Arthur Bell's office." "Then you know." "Yes, I know," she snapped. "You're leaving the estate to a man you've known for a month." 2 months, I corrected gently. And it wasn't time that made the decision. It was presence. She stared at me, speechless. The anger was rising in her face like a storm cloud. "Do you have any idea what this looks like?" she hissed. "A young man, alone, unemployed, suddenly inheriting a full estate from an elderly man who lives alone? People talk. They assume things." "Let them assume," I said, voice steady. "I'm not here to manage rumors." She threw her hands up. "This is ridiculous. You're rewarding a stranger and punishing your own children." "Punishment would be writing you out with a cruel note," I said. "This isn't that. This is clarity. I'm leaving what I built to someone who saw me, not as a burden, not as a wallet, but as a person." "You think we didn't care?" she asked, her voice breaking. I set down the kettle, letting the silence sit for a moment before replying. "Claire, you cared the way people care for things they feel obligated to. Cards, check-in calls, carefully scheduled visits, but caring means showing up even when it's inconvenient, even when there's nothing in it for you." "We had lives," she whispered. "Jobs, kids, responsibilities." "So did I said, "but I never missed your birthday, never spent a Christmas wondering if I'd hear your voice." Her eyes filled with tears, not crocodile tears, real ones, confused ones. "This house was your childhood," I continued, voice gentler now. "But you've treated it like an inheritance waiting to be claimed, not a memory waiting to be honored. You could have told me you felt this way. And what would you have said? That you'd try harder? That things were just busy?" She didn't answer. We stood in that thick silence again. The house seemed to lean in, listening. Then she said something that struck deeper than she realized. "Do you even love us anymore?" I looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, not with spite, just with truth. "I love you, Claire, but love and trust aren't the same thing. Love is what I feel, trust is what you've lost." Her face crumpled. She sat down slowly, like her knees were failing her. "How did this happen?" she whispered. "How did we become strangers?" "We stopped speaking the same language," I said. "I spoke in memories, and you answered with distance. I stayed rooted, and you floated away." "And him?" she asked, looking toward Jordan's scarf. "You think he is your family now?" "No," I said. "I don't think that. I know it." She stared at the fireplace, eyes glassy, lips tight. I sat across from her and finally poured the tea, handed her a cup whether she wanted it or not. She took it, didn't drink. "What do you want me to do, Dad?" she asked. "Beg? Grovel? Cut him out?" "I want you to understand," I said, "not for the money, not for the property, but for the love that deserves to be witnessed." She looked up at me. "You think I can't change? I think you haven't shown me you want to." We sat for a while after that. The tea cooled between our hands. Nothing more was said. She left an hour later, quietly, without slamming the door, but without hugging me either. That night, Jordan came by late. The lights were low, and I was in the armchair with a blanket over my knees. "You okay?" he asked, stepping in slowly. "Claire came by," I said. He nodded. "Figured." I told him everything. The fight, the hurt, the honesty. He didn't say much, just listened. Then he said, "I don't want to be the reason your family hates you." "You're not," I said. "They made their choices long before you knocked on my door." He leaned forward. "I don't want your things, Milton. I just want to keep showing up." I looked at him then, really looked, and saw a young man with nothing to gain and everything to give. "And that," I said, "is exactly why the things will be yours." He sat back, let out a long breath. "I'm going to take care of it," he said softly. "The house, the garden, the birds, even the radiator." I laughed. "It does have a temper," he smiled, "like someone else I know." The fire crackled in the grate. The house, so used to sorrow, felt soft with something else. Not joy, exactly, not peace, but honesty. And in that honesty we found something close to family, something real, something chosen, something that wouldn't need to be explained in a will, only remembered in a story. It began, quietly, like most new things do, not with fanfare or proclamations, but with routines, small ones, deliberate and unspoken. Jordan started arriving in the mornings before I even finished my tea, sometimes with breakfast rolls, sometimes with the paper, always with that dog-eared notebook he carried in his coat pocket. He never said what he wrote in it. I never asked. Some things are meant to stay private, even between family. Yes, family. I had stopped resisting that word, stopped weighing it down with obligation and bloodline, because that's not what it meant anymore, not to me, not after this winter. We had somehow built something between the walls of this old house, something that looked like kinship, like chosen roots, not inherited ones. It started when he helped me fix the front steps, those old wooden planks that had warped in the frost. It wasn't a major repair, but it took us all morning. Jordan did most of the lifting. I handed him nails and told him stories about how Dorothy used to yell at the kids for running up and down them too fast, claiming someone would crack their skull open on Christmas morning. "Did they?" Jordan asked. "No," I said, "but the threat kept them from racing." He laughed. "She sounds like someone who kept everything just steady enough." "She did," I said. "She really did." We painted the steps afterward. Pale blue, just like they used to be before time and weather had their way with them. Jordan insisted on doing the corners perfectly. "If we're going to restore a house," he said, "we're restoring it properly." That word, "we," landed in me like warmth. In the evenings, he'd stay a little longer. We'd light a fire. He'd read from that novel he liked, the one with the cranky old Swede and the nosy neighbors. Sometimes I'd fall asleep while he read. He never seemed to mind. He'd cover me with the old tartan blanket Dorothy used to favor, and the next morning I'd find the fire safely out, the room tidied and the tea kettle filled. Some nights he'd stay late enough that I'd offer the spare room. "Just take it," I said once. "You keep coming back anyway." He moved a few things in slowly, a spare pair of boots, a toothbrush, his own box of tea. We didn't talk about it. It just happened, like rain soaking into the soil, gradual and necessary. He found Dorothy's old garden journal one day, wedged behind the pantry. Pages full of her neat, slanted handwriting, entries about which vegetables survived the shade, which flowers bloomed early, which birds came to visit the feeder each spring. Jordan read through it like scripture. "We should plant again," he said. "She left the blueprint. Would be a shame not to use it." "My knees don't like kneeling anymore." "Then you supervise, I'll do the kneeling." In February, we started seeds indoors. Little paper pots lined the kitchen windowsill, catching whatever sunlight the grey sky offered. He watered them every morning, whispering encouragements like they were listening. They probably were. One night, during a particularly strong windstorm, we lost power. The house fell into a silence so deep it felt like the walls were listening. I reached for the old lantern in the hallway, but Jordan had already lit candles and was dragging the old record player out. Got one of those wind-up ones, he said. Rescued it from a flea market. Doesn't need electricity. Want to test it? He played Nat King Cole, crackly but rich, and we sat in the living room drinking tea by candlelight. The storm howled outside, but inside it felt like time had slowed. No buzz of the fridge, no hum from the heater, just music and flame and memory. You ever think this place feels more alive without all the noise? Jordan asked. Sometimes, I said. Sometimes quiet lets you hear what matters. He nodded. I get that. I watched him in the candlelight, this stranger turn something more, and thought about how wildly unpredictable life could be. How a knock on Christmas Day had unraveled years of loneliness in less than a season. He had asked nothing of me. Never pushed, never pried, just arrived, stayed, listened, left room for me to speak or not. When I told him I'd rewritten the will in his name, he cried. Not out of greed or shock, but grief. Real grief. They'll hate me for this, he said. They'll forget you, I replied, but they already forgot me. Difference is you came back. He never asked me to take it back, never hinted at repayment. He just kept showing up. A new kind of family is built that way, not with announcements, but actions, not with shared genetics, but shared silence. Shared bread. Shared mornings when the sun comes in slow and warm through the kitchen window, and both of you just sit there saying nothing, because nothing needs to be said. In early March, we planted the garden. He dug the rows. I sat nearby in the sun, reading from Dorothy's journal. She says the sweet peas should go near the fence, I told him. Then that's where they'll go, he said, hands in the soil. The earth smelled rich and wet. Robins chirped from the hedges, and I realized this was it. Not a replacement for the life I'd lost, not a fix for all the broken parts, but a new chapter, a final one maybe, but full, not hollow. We didn't say much as we worked. We didn't have to. He planted. I read. The wind moved through the bay, and for once nothing felt missing. Later, we sat on the porch, drinking lemon water and watching the breeze bend the tall grass beyond the fence. You know, I said, you've made this house feel like a home again. He looked out toward the garden. You made it a home. I just moved in. No, I said. Dorothy made it a home. I kept it alive. We made it family. He smiled. Nodded once. That night I wrote in a notebook of my own. Something small. A letter, maybe. Maybe just a page. I tucked it into the drawer beside my bed. It said simply, if you're reading this, I hope the garden still grows. I hope you still sit on the porch with tea. I hope the birds still visit. And I hope you know. You were the son I never knew I needed. Thank you for finding me. Love, Milton. And beneath that, in smaller letters, P.S. Water the sweet peas, they're finicky bastards. Outside the wind rustled the leaves, inside the house was warm. And at long last, I was not alone.